On last night's show, we reported on this from the great state of Texas. This is from the Dallas Morning News. Greg Abbott steps in it on chemicals issue. Greg Abbott is Texas's Republican candidate for governor this year. He's currently the attorney general in the state. And earlier this year, it turns out, which was just about a year after this huge and fatal explosion at an ammonium nitrate fertilizer plant in Texas, which killed 15 people and injured more than 200 people. Almost exactly a year after that explosion, Texas Attorney General Greg Abbott declared that the state of Texas would no longer tell the public where large quantities of explosive chemicals are stored in that state. For decades, that information had been public information in Texas, but not anymore. In May, Greg Abbott's office issued a ruling saying that state agencies must start withholding that information from the public. That's the only significant change in rules or policies or laws in Texas since unsafe storage of chemicals set off that apocalypse in that little town of West Texas last year. The only thing the state government has changed since then is Greg Abbott saying the state will no longer tell Texas families if they're living next door to something like this. And Greg Abbott issued that ruling in May, but he did so very quietly, and the press in Texas is just starting to pick up on it. Greg Abbott was asked about it by reporters in Austin on Tuesday. It did not go well.
You know, Jay, you know where they are if you drive around. Let's bear this down. If you're living in West Texas, you know that there's some facility there, and you have the right to ask the people in West Texas, hey, what chemicals do you have in there?
Just drive around. You can figure it out. After that, we got the Dallas Morning News editorial, Abbott steps in it on chemicals issue. Now, today, there's this one. This is the Fort Worth Star-Telegram, also editorializing against Greg Abbott on this, calling him off base. Quote, Greg Abbott's comments about disclosure of where dangerous chemicals are stored in the state proved to be almost as explosive as a bin of ammonium nitrate. The Attorney General made several statements that were insulting and certainly not befitting a candidate for governor. Yeah, drive around. You figure it out. On paper, at least, there are a lot of things that could give Democrats a real chance in the red state of Texas in this year of all years. I mean, one, obviously, is Latino voters. About 38% of Texas is Latino and growing. And now that demographic growth in Texas is being matched by an effort by Democrats to find and register and mobilize those eligible Latino voters. It's also the case that this year, the Democratic candidate for lieutenant governor, Leticia Van de Putte, she is both Latina and really popular in the Texas Hispanic community. And that brings up the second thing that could conceivably give Democrats a shot this year in Texas. He is the Republican candidate for lieutenant governor in Texas. His name is Dan Patrick. He's a right-wing talk radio host who is thought to be so out there, even for Texas, that he might have a voter repellent effect on the whole Republican ticket in the way that some people think that Sarah Palin did for the Republican ticket in 2008. So there's the Latino voters and that potential. That's one issue. There's Dan Patrick as potential kryptonite on the ballot. That's a second issue. The third issue that could give Democrats a shot is this new issue that just emerged when Greg Abbott decided a year after that fertilizer plant explosion killed 15 people right next to a Texas middle school that the law should be changed in Texas to stop disclosing the storage location of dangerous chemicals in Texas neighborhoods. That's the third issue. That's the new one. But then there is also this new crisis on the border, a legitimate policy and humanitarian crisis on the border, and one that is happening in Texas more than it is happening anywhere else on the southern edge of our country. I mean, the thing is, politically, Republicans in Texas used to have a reputation for being comparatively pragmatic, even compassionate on the issue of immigration. Frankly, you have to be that way in Texas. Texas is 38% Latino. But Texas Republicans don't have that pragmatic streak anymore, not this generation of red Texas. I mean, Dan Patrick's whole campaign is about stopping the illegal invasion of Texas by Mexico. I mean, now Texas Republican rhetoric tends more toward Texas needing to secede from the United States. The Texas Republican response to unaccompanied kids coming to the border from Central America is conspiracy theories that the governor's voicing on TV about how President Obama has arranged this crisis on purpose. He sent the kids because Benghazi or something, I don't know. There is a legitimate policy and humanitarian crisis on the border, particularly in Texas, but the Texas Republican political response so far has just been to go full talk radio on the issue. So is that part of the potential this year for Texas Democrats? I mean, amid all these other opportunities that they've got this year among all years, can Democrats distinguish themselves as having more to offer practically on this issue than the set themselves on fire, spinning their wheels hysteria that it has generated on the right. Hold that thought.
Greg Abbott obviously is doing everything he can to try to undo a mess that he has made. But let's make no mistake about it. What Greg Abbott has ruled is that families do not deserve to know where these dangerous chemicals are stored. And there's absolutely no excuse for that.
Joining us now for the interview tonight is the Democratic candidate for governor of Texas. She's running against Greg Abbott. She's State Senator Wendy Davis. Senator Davis, thanks very much for being with us tonight.
Thank you, Rachel.
So why do you think that Greg Abbott is wrong on this chemicals decision, and what would you do differently?
Well, there's no mistaking that he's wrong. And as you said earlier, for decades in Texas, it's been our practice to comply with the law that President Reagan helped to shepherd through, the Community Right to Know Act, because parents deserve to know whether they are living or their children are going to school or their parents might be in a nursing home that's next to one of these facilities that stores dangerous chemicals. And there's simply no excuse for suddenly reversing course in what the state has done for decades in compliance with that law and hiding that information from parents across this state.
Is this one of those issues?
As governor,
I'm sorry, let me just interrupt you there for a second. Is this one of those issues where I'm looking at this from New York and you're looking at it from Texas, and there's some weird ideological rift about this story that I can't see? There's some mysterious Texas Republican ideological attitude that makes them opposed to something like that, even though they would have supported it in the Reagan era? Do you know what's driving this change?
You know, I think when you look at what drove the change with Abbott, you need to look no further than the campaign contributions that he's received from the Koch brothers, who have at least one of these facilities that stores these dangerous chemicals in the state of Texas.
What would you do differently as governor?
As governor, and as I laid out today in a couple of press conferences that I've held, I will call for an emergency item to be placed on the legislative calendar so that this issue can immediately be taken up and addressed by the Texas legislature before the typical 60-day period of time that it takes for legislation to be considered, and for the legislature to act in a way that gives true meaning, once again, to the Community Right to Know Act and empowers Texas families with information to help keep their families safe and to make decisions about where they'll live and where they'll put their children in school, to give our school districts the ability to decide where to build their schools, where hospitals should be built, where nursing homes should be built, so that we can assure as much as possible that communities across this state are safe.
Texas Governor Rick Perry has recently said that in terms of the border crisis in Texas and along the southern border of the United States, he thinks there is a conspiracy behind it. He thinks it's on purpose. Tomorrow, he's meeting with President Obama on the issue. I know that you have called on Governor Perry to call a state of emergency on the border. Why do you want that? What would that do?
It is a term of art, essentially, in Texas, which allows the release of resources to help the local communities that are bearing the burden and the costs of taking care of this influx of people from across the border. I've asked for a special session that would hear from our local communities, from first responders, from charitable organizations who are on the ground and who are taking care primarily of these children who are unaccompanied minors and who have been coming in literally by the hundreds every single day, and who are under the care of many incredible people doing amazing work, but who need to have the costs for that care covered. Ultimately, it's the federal government's responsibility. And not only have I called on Governor Perry asking for a special session to be called so that we can deal with this at the state level and do our part in helping our local communities, but that ultimately the federal government do its job and that it reimburse us for those costs. I was very pleased to hear President Obama call today for $3.7 billion to be brought to these border communities and to help supplement and make sure that they are safe, that our Border Patrol officers can do their job, and that they can assure that drug smugglers and human traffickers are the real focus of our Border Patrol officers, as they should be, and that the government should also, of course, make sure that we're doing what we can to, as I said, help reimburse these local communities for the costs that they're bearing.
Texas State Senator Wendy Davis, Democratic candidate for governor in the state of Texas. Thanks very much for being with us tonight. I know you're very busy. Thanks very much. I appreciate it. We'll be right back.
Thank you.